I don't necessarily know if in that moment in time that I knew that I needed to be challenged. I knew that I was wanting something more, and I knew that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in life. And through this process over the past 5 years of leading IT and human resources, I developed a passion around building others and developing teams. But I think that also speaks to the importance of, as we move through the seasons of our life, trying new things. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're just kind of fumbling along and you become complacent and you don't have that meaning or purpose, start seeking some sort of a challenge, start trying new things, and you may just find something that completely changes your life.
Sean Barnes is a cross-functional executive leader focused on helping everyone around him become the best version of themselves and achieve greatness in their life and business. And today, that's what we're talking about. Today, we're going to talk about how you can build a world-class team. We're going to be talking about building leaders. We're going to be talking about mindset. We're going to be talking about the things that you do for yourself that trickle down to those on your team to help them become greater and more effective human beings who are operating at their full potential. If you take even just one thing out of this conversation with Sean Barnes today, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. We don't run sponsors. We don't have ads. That's because we don't want to interrupt your viewing experience. And we want to bring you the truth, the hard truth that will help you improve your life and your team's life. So without further ado, we have Sean Barnes with us today. Sean, first and foremost, thank you for being on the show. It's great to have you here, brother.
Man, it is such an honor. And then seeing that intro that you've got is absolutely incredible. I know that I'm in great company here, so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We're going to have a good time. I'm pumped for it. We were introduced by Rob Party, who was on the show, and you just recently had him on your show as well. And he is an extraordinary human being. And he introduced me to a few people. Okay. And you were one of those small group of people he introduced me to. And I've had the best conversations with several of the people he introduced me to, including yourself. And I was like, we got to bring you on the show to talk about what you're doing. Because for those who don't know Sean already, for those who haven't seen his show, Way of the Wolf, Sean is a corporate executive leader. Like, he's not just someone who woke up one day and said, I want to talk about leadership. I want to talk about living a better life. Like, he's doing it every day. He's got a team of around 50 people, and he's helping them to become better leaders, to live better lives, while he is creating amazing content as a thought leader on LinkedIn, on YouTube, with his show, Way of the Wolf. So I have to compliment you, brother, just on all of the different things that you do, because you could just do one of those things and everyone would look at that and be like, wow, he's doing a lot. But you decided to lead in the real world while also teaching those principles to other people who can learn from that as well. So I commend you for that, man.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that I've learned over the past few years, I started the show about 2 years ago now, and I came to this realization that I have a passion around building leaders and developing others and helping them become the best versions of themselves. And it's because this is my passion, it makes it so much easier for me to do all of the things that I do, because I absolutely love it every single day, working with my team, working with others, creating content, just helping people out. It is so fulfilling for me. So I appreciate you sharing that, but it's actually easy for me just because I truly love it.
I hear you. I think you and I are in very similar situations, because I also live in the corporate world, and I also found love and enjoyment of what I did inside of that company. And now I've taken what I've learned, and that's why I started my show. That's why I've got my YouTube channel. That's why I do what I do. So you and I probably have the most similar story of each other in terms of why we're doing what we're doing and where we come from. But like, where did this passion of building leaders begin for you? Like, was it something you've always had? Was this something that was developed during your work in the corporate world? Like, talk to me about where it actually came from.
So it's an interesting story. I have been an IT professional for the entirety of my career. Technology has always just come easy to me. Now, along with that, if you look at personality traits, I was always the introverted IT nerd all through junior high and high school, very much to myself. And through my IT career, I was kind of that IT manager that would sit in his office and bang away at his keyboard and win every single keyboard war. during my mid 30s, I kind of had this realization that I was needing something more. And I didn't know what yet, but I started looking for opportunities and I realized that I needed a challenge. And at my current employer now, there was an opportunity to step in and start leading human resources. And so I had that conversation with our CEO once my predecessor on that side departed. And getting in and leading the HR team, I quickly realized that I could no longer sit in my office and bang away at my keyboard, that I had to learn how to talk to people. I had to learn how to effectively communicate. And for me to be able to build the people on the team, I had to better understand what their personalities were, what drove them. And that was about 5 years ago now. And through this process over the past 5 years of leading IT and human resources, I developed a passion around building others and developing teams and building high performing teams. And there have been a lot of mistakes and issues or errors made along the way, but man, it is so fulfilling whenever you bring someone in and start working with them and coaching them and guiding them and seeing them realize potential that sometimes they didn't even see in themselves. And so that's kind of the origin story of how I found this passion around leadership development and coaching and building others. It was something that I kind of stumbled into, but I think that also speaks to the importance of, as we move through the seasons of our life, trying new things. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're just kind of fumbling along and you become complacent and you don't have that meaning or purpose, start seeking some sort of a challenge, start trying new things, and you may just find something that completely changes your life.
That is a golden nugget, brother, because let me tell you something. The points in my life where I was least quote unquote happy. And when I say happy, that means I wake up each day and I have an idea of what I want to accomplish. I wake up each day and I know what those activities are leading me towards. For me, happiness is that sense of making progress and accomplishing something, right? When I don't have that, I don't feel good whatsoever. And I work a lot with specifically salespeople, right, in the wireless industry. And it's a quote unquote easy job because once you know the systems, the plans, the product, it's pretty much clockwork. Like it doesn't change too much, just the product does. And the people I find who do the greatest, the people I find who are the happiest are the people who continually challenge themselves. And to the opposite of that, the people who I find, even those who are great at sales, like they're making a lot of money, but they come to work and they're just not happy to be there. Those are the people I find they're not challenged. So when you were at that point of you were doing well in your career, but before you were leading people and before you learned the nuances of communicating with people, how did you know that there was an absence of challenge? Like you said a second ago, I wanted a challenge. Well, how did you know? Was that a feeling? Was that a knowingness? How did you come to that conclusion?
I have always been intrinsically driven for the entirety of my life. I wanted to climb that corporate ladder. I wanted that six-figure salary. I wanted that VP title, all of those things. And now looking back, I realized how inwardly focused those all were. To answer your question, I don't necessarily know if in that moment in time that I knew that I needed to be challenged. I knew that I was wanting something more, and I knew that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in life. And so having conversations with peers, trusted advisors, and people that I refer to as my personal board of directors, these are people like mentors that I look up to and respect. They shared with me, hey, is it possible that you're just not being challenged anymore? And then
Mm.
it hit me. And at that point in my career, I'd been leading technology or in technology for 15, 20 years. And it just came easy to me. I was coasting. I was on cruise control. I had achieved all of those goals I set for myself. And I was just comfortable with where I was at, but I
Mhm.
wasn't fulfilled. And really, what it came down to is seeking out mentors and coaches and guides. And they kind of shined a light and said, hey, this is probably what's going on. Maybe you start exploring another path. And so, while I would love to say, oh, I had this realization event, it was actually coaches and mentors that helped me get there. And once I realized my path, then it was time to execute again.
That's right. Yeah, that again, we have very similar stories, man. I was doing well in my career. I was at that point where I felt unfulfilled. I was not challenged. So I was completely inward, like what you just said. And what you're saying is allowing me to look inside and see things in a different way, which so I appreciate that. But I was so inward that my challenge was I'm making a lot of money and now I want to spend this money and enjoy this money. So I was spending all this money on things I didn't need. And we talked about this during our conversation together. Like even now, you mentioned that you live very below your means. And I hope that's okay for me just to broadcast
It
to
is.
everybody. But I think that's an important life principle that you don't have you don't have the the Lambo or, more
Mhm.
realistically, even the BMW or the Mercedes or the Audi out in the driveway. You've got something economical, even though you could buy those things if you wanted to.
Mhm.
But I was the opposite. I was only inward. So I was buying the BMW, I was buying the guitars, I was buying anything that would convey a sense of success about myself to other people because of how I wanted to be seen. But isn't it fascinating? And this happens during all the conversations I have on this show. And I'm sure it's the same with you with Way of the Wolf, where you're talking to people in that moment of life transformation and that true moment of growth comes when you move from inward to outward. And you move from looking to get more things yourself to moving to help other people to build and help them to get things. It's a fascinating transition there.
It truly is. And I experienced something very similar through my late 20s and early 30s. As I was climbing that corporate ladder, as I was earning more and more income, my thing was cars. I've always been into drag racing. And so Trans Ams and Camaros and Corvettes and all of that stuff. And I grew up really without any money. And so once I started achieving a level of success and earning more income, man, it was the Brandon, there was at one point in my life when I had 6 cars and a motorcycle. So
Whoa.
I was definitely out there spending the money. Now, I've slowed down on that substantially and realized that having financial freedom doesn't mean going and spending every dollar you earn on all these fancy toys and cars and jet skis and all of that stuff. It's knowing that you have enough money stashed away for a rainy day so that in the event you do lose your job, that you're not worried, you're not
Mhm.
concerned. And for the majority of my professional career, I've worked in oil and gas, and we all know how cyclical that industry can be. So I've learned to save that money. Now I've been very fortunate. I've been through 3 downturns in oil and gas and never lost my job, but that's always stuck out in the back of my mind. And so now, while I do earn even more money, and there are things that I would love, Brandon, I would love to go buy a pool, the new Corvette C8 Z06. Oh my
It's so
God,
nice.
I want one so bad. And
Yeah.
technically, I could buy a few of them if I wanted
Yeah.
to, but
They're
I'm
reasonable.
saving
They
all
really
of
are
that money.
reasonable for what it is.
It really is. And I've come to the realization that whenever you are comfortable financially, it eliminates so many stressors in life around, oh God, what happens if I lose my job? Okay, but above and beyond that, it allows me to make decisions from my heart without fear of any sort of repercussions.
Yeah.
I can do what I know in my heart, in my gut is right, and not really be worried about it. Because if I lose my job because I did something that in my heart I knew was right,
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. I'll go
Yeah.
do something else. However, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you don't always have that luxury.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to bend the knee and do something that you don't feel comfortable doing. And I realized I don't want to live my life like that. Now it has
Yeah.
served me well because my intentions and passions and purpose are all around building others. But that the level of freedom that comes with that, I just can't stress how important it is and how incredible it feels.
I 100% agree. When you transition from being behind the keyboard to transitioning to then leading other people and figuring out I need to learn how to communicate with people. I need to learn how to work with different personality types and help them to take it to that next level. Because let me tell you, I discovered the same thing. Like, working with someone who has an engineer mind is working with someone who is the complete opposite of me. Like, we think in different ways, we talk in different ways, not all the time, but most of the time. So how did you learn how to communicate with other styles of personalities? How did you learn communication? Like, where did you go to? Did you go to mentors? Did you go to books? And kind of on top of that, I know this is a loaded question, but how did you even discover that you didn't know those things? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? So did you discover it through the attempt of leading? Did you discover it through conversations with mentors? Like, how did you learn the act of leading yourself?
This is also, once again, where the importance of mentors comes into play, because I had a very good friend of mine, colleague, who, as I was leading human resources, he was leading the leadership development function at the company that I worked for. And so he brought a lot of these things to light for me. He was a retired Navy SEAL Master Chief, understood a lot about leadership. And one of the exercises we did early on, whenever I stepped into leading human resources, we read a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And then all of us took DISC profiles, or DISC personality assessments. And when we went through those exercises, I had this eye-opening experience of, oh my God, there are other personality types that are different from mine. It's not that Sally is just a pain to work with. This is how she operates. She's very analytical. She needs to see data a certain way. And it's not that Jason doesn't care about data. That's just how his mind works. He's extroverted, outgoing, and bubbly. And so realizing that there are these different types of personalities was a turning point for me, because at that point I was able to tailor my messaging and the way I led and the way I coached to each individual person, because I knew more about them and I better understood how they operated. So to answer your question, once again, it just came down to a mentor and a guide kind of pointing me the way. And then I started learning and just spent all of my free time better understanding behavioral assessments. And there's all sorts of, there's DISC and Berkman and TTI. And I mean, the list goes on. And there's an underlying theme to how all of them work. But once you realize that we are all different, it makes it much easier for you to adapt as a leader. And that is one of the biggest things that I've learned as a leader, is you have to check your ego and lead each individual person the way they need to be led. It's no longer about, hey, I'm Sean, this is how I lead, this is what you're going to do, because you will not be successful.
Yeah.
You might achieve some level of success short term, but it is not sustainable. You have to adapt. And that is one of the burdens of leadership. Leadership can be very fulfilling, but you have to adapt and have to realize that it is about every single person on your team, which means all of your energy and effort needs to go into understanding them and empowering them and building them.
Okay, so how do you do that? How do you discover how someone wants to be led? How do you learn more about, and it sounds like a simple basic question, but a lot of leaders aren't doing this, right? Let me rephrase that. A lot of people with the title of leader aren't doing this, but there's a lot of people who don't even have that title who are doing it on a daily basis, and they're leaders without the title. Like, how do you go about discovering how people want to be led and learning more about them? What's your viewpoint on that?
I think you have to be very intentional. You have to realize, once you step into that leadership role, that it's no longer about you. It's no longer about how much data can Sean output, how many reports can Sean build. It has to be, there's a book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. I don't know if you've ever read it, but for all of you listening, please go read that book. And it beautifully articulates the point of strong leaders become multipliers by building and investing into everyone on their team. So to answer your question around how do you do that, you have to be intentional and you have to care. And you have to check your ego and realize that it's no longer about you. And one thing that I have realized is, in transitioning from a person who was very intrinsically driven and focused inwardly on what could I accomplish, what salary, what title, what position could I accomplish, and flipping that switch over to how can I help Sally be the strongest leader? How can I help Jason do the things that I know he's capable of doing? When you start building everyone else on your team, what I realized is all ships rise with the tide. So
Mhm.
while I was building and developing them, I was also progressing in my career. Now, that was no longer the motivator for me. It was just a nice side effect. But what that also does is it allows me to have a greater impact on those around me, have a
Mhm.
greater impact on even more lives. And so that's really that switch when it flipped for me, it just came into that point in my life when I transitioned into leading HR and then finding out that I have a passion around it. I put my ego to the side and then just said, "Hey, this is my purpose. It's to build everyone else around me." And Brandon, it's just been so fulfilling.
I believe that. And I want to touch on what you said about ego
Mhm.
because full transparency, ego is something that I've really started to dive into the last few years and understanding it more because I am a high ego individual. It's just the matter of fact. That's why I've always been great at sales since I started my career because I love the recognition. I love the competition. I love being the man. I love being number one. But when I became a leader, I had to learn the hard way that I need to do what you mentioned, put myself to the side and focus on helping Sally achieve what she wants. But when that voice is in your head of, well, this is what I want, this is what I want to achieve, like, are you confronted with your ego frequently? And when you do hear that voice, and a lot of the time, by the way, I'm not even conscious of that voice happening. I'm only conscious when I look back and say, wow, that was the ego talking. Like, how do you stifle your ego? Are you a naturally ego driven individual like myself? And how do you personally stifle the ego to focus on others?
So this is interesting. As you were talking through that, I felt that it makes sense that you would have that element of your personality being in sales because you have to be confident to be a strong salesperson. There
Yes.
is an element of ego, and some ego can be a good thing if it's driving you to accomplish your goals.
Hmm.
Now, because I've been such an introvert, I don't like the spotlight. I never have liked the spotlight. That's never really been an issue for me. Now, there are times whenever I will be proud of what I have accomplished, but experiencing ego hasn't really been much of a challenge for me just because I don't really care for the attention. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't like the spotlight, which actually has made it easier for me to be successful in a leadership role because I'm able to turn the spotlight on Sally, on Jason, on Jonathan. I can turn the light over to them and put them in the spotlight, and it actually works out beautifully for me because I don't like the spotlight. I don't like the attention.
Wow. Yeah. It's very interesting because I truthfully, I like the spotlight. I love to be in front of the room. I love to share what I know. And I think that comes from a place of being an educator that I've
Mhm.
been my whole life. Even since a kid, I used to get home and reteach the lessons that I learned at school to my dad as he was in his recliner chair. And now I still educate. I wanted to be a teacher at one point, and I feel that I am a teacher now. And I feel like you are a teacher now, even if we didn't intend to, expand our lives into that realm. That's very much what we do. But I also identify with being an introvert. And I identify with being that because I love the spotlight. But when it comes to being in a room with people I don't know and
Mhm.
having to make conversation and not wanting to be standing alone without anybody, that's the most anxious anyone will ever
Mhm.
see me is at an event like that. It's still the
Yeah.
same way. Even if I'm the person hosting the event, it can be the same way. So, how as a leader, because I feel like that is common amongst a lot of leaders is a lot of people do identify with being an introvert.
Mhm.
So how do you do it? How can you be an introvert and be in the spotlight? Because by default, as a leader, at a lot of times you are in the spotlight when you're training, when you're coaching. Like, how do you balance being an introvert with being an effective leader?
Oh man, such a good question. It's not easy. And whenever I started the podcast and the YouTube channel, it was an effort to push myself out of my comfort zone. And I think the simplest way for me to articulate my thoughts here is going to be my purpose is greater than my fear of being in the spotlight.
Whoa.
And that's what I have to tell myself. I actually had the opportunity to give my first keynote speech about a month or so ago. And whenever I stepped on stage, it was the first time I had spotlights in my face and the lighting in the audience was dim. And oh man, I almost locked up. It was pretty rough. But about 30 seconds, 45 seconds in, I was able to adjust and start making out some of the faces in the audience, and allowed me to connect with people. And I was able to just keep moving forward. But even today, I still get nervous. Before we go live, before I hit record on every podcast, I get nervous because that's who I am at my core. And a few minutes in, or 30 seconds in, or however long it takes, I kind of hit my stride. I start feeling more comfortable because I know, hey, I'm in my element. I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And now it's just about sharing a message and helping others.
Yes. Well said. My purpose is greater than my fear of fill in the blank. That is powerful, brother. I wrote that down because I'm gonna reflect on that because it's so true. And we all have that fear. And I'm curious, when you have those fears, like, do you have a process of, this may not be the best phrase of it, but do you have a process of pushing through the fear or silencing the fear? Like before you stepped on that stage, because obviously you knew you were going to do it. You knew you weren't going to leave. You knew you weren't going to say, oh, I can't do it. I've changed my mind. I'm too nervous. Like, how did you do it? How did you stifle or push through that fear?
I try to incorporate a little bit of comedic relief. If you can get the crowd laughing, it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. Now,
Yeah.
I have been through a public speaking course where they actually record you, critique you, and coach you through how to become a better public speaker. And one of the things that I realized or learned through that process is that it doesn't matter how nervous you get, only about 10% of those nerves are actually showing through to the people in the audience. And so
Wow.
while I wear an Apple Watch and I track my heart rate each time, and every single time it goes through the roof. But whenever I look at video footage, you can't tell. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people need to realize is it doesn't matter how nervous you are, only about 10-15% of that is actually going to shine through. If you
Yeah.
know your content, if you know your messaging, and you've practiced and rehearsed your speech or your training session, just get it over with. And then another thing that has helped me is just recording myself. I'll put out my cell phone and record myself when I do a practice speech, and then I can critique myself. And what's so interesting, the first time you start recording yourself with the intent of maybe posting it online, you get nervous. Your heart rate spikes, and it's a very similar effect on your body as stepping on stage. And
Yes.
so what you're doing, your body doesn't know the difference, whether you're stepping on stage or recording in front of your camera or posting something on social media in a live fashion. Just start doing more of that to get the reps in. And
Yeah.
over time, you will gradually get more comfortable. Now, like I said, that has 2 years in, I still get nervous. I'm hoping there will be a day whenever I can hit record and not have my heart rate spike. But
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm comfortable. We're rolling through the content, and that's key. Just practice getting the reps in.
I think the day that your heart rate doesn't go up, the day that you're not nervous before you go on stage or go on camera or have that important conversation is the day that you should worry. I think that elevated heart rate, those nerves, that excitement that you feel that some people call fear, but if you really dig deep, that emotion of fear causes the same physical response that the emotion of excitement would do. They're very similar. It's all about how you label it. It's all about what you call it. Right.
Yep.
So I find something that helps me a lot because it's the same thing. Like I remember the first video I posted. I remember the first presentation I gave to a room of people. It was when I became a team lead, actually. And it was a group of people who I was around every single day, about 17 people. And I remember the first words were, "I'm so nervous right now." And then my coworker was like, "Why are you nervous? You talk to us every day. Like this is literally the same thing that you've been doing for the last 3 years." And that made me realize she's absolutely right. But something happens. We make things bigger in our mind than they really are. And even to this day, before I go into a company meeting, before I give a presentation, before I do a podcast, not always with the podcast, but I should, but before I go in front of people physically, I always like to visualize and practice in my mind what it's going to be like when I'm giving that presentation or speech to that group of people. And I'll literally see it in the first person in my mind. Even if I haven't been to the room yet, I always like to go there first to see what it looks like. But with you on the stage, with those lights on you, I'll visualize that. I'll visualize faces in the audience. I'll visualize myself giving that presentation, and I'll visualize good feelings as I do it. And one of the things that's really helped me to this day is looking at those people in the audience in my mind and during the actual event, and thinking to myself, as cheesy as this sounds, I think to myself and say, I love these people. Like, I am here to serve these people. Even in sales, something that has really helped me, especially when I have a difficult client, I always look at them, look into their eyes, and I don't say it out loud because I'd probably get thrown out, but I think in my mind, I love you, right? And it's out there and it's weird, but I challenge everyone listening, when you're talking to someone today, especially if you're in retail, sales, or any kind of client work, look into that person's eyes and think to yourself, I love this person. I love you. And just notice how quickly your body changes in sensation. Immediately notice what you're feeling in your body. Notice what you're thinking. Notice how your interaction changes with that individual. But it goes to what you just said, Sean. It's practice. It's doing the reps. It's getting out there. The first time you do it, it's probably not going to be that great. Expect that, right? But just practice, practice, practice. You're over episode 100 on Way of the Wolf now. And I suspect that episode 100 was very different than episode 1, right?
Very much so. Very, very much so. It's funny, whenever I started the podcasting journey, I didn't have video in the beginning. It was probably a few months in before I started recording video. And even whenever I did, it was just an old cell phone that I had set up. But the first few audio episodes of the podcast, you can actually hear whenever I was clipping the audio clips together, trying to get it to mesh, because what would happen is I would fumble my words a little bit, beat myself up, and then I would fix it in post and splice it together. So you can hear slight little changes to the inflection of my voice or tonality or the volume. It was a mess, Brandon. But now I'm much more comfortable. And because I'm a techie at heart, I have nice cameras, nice audio equipment, and things like that, just because I geek out. And I've tried all sorts of different microphones and cameras and things like that. But it's all part of the journey of figuring out what works for you and then learning and growing.
And we use the same microphone now, which is really cool.
I've
I
noticed
will
that.
say, if you
It's a
guys
good
aren't
mic.
watching, it is so good. Yeah. If you guys aren't watching, you need to go check out the video version of this just to see the background that Sean has. And let me tell you something, guys, especially for those who are, Zoom connoisseurs at this point and still on Zoom a lot and still presenting yourself virtually to an audience of people, like, your background gives you pride. And the way that you present yourself inspires that confidence. If you're hosting it from your bedroom and just doing what you need to do, it's a different vibe than when you've got your logo behind you and you've got the lights and you've got a cool setup. Like, it doesn't just present you differently to people, but it makes you feel better also. And I'm definitely taking pointers from you, brother. So thank you again for that.
I appreciate that. And further to that point, I've come to this realization over the past probably year or so. It was about a year ago whenever I got the wolf head logo made. But every time I come in to the studio, my mindset shifts into a content creation mode. And so what that means is your environment has an impact on your mindset. And right now I'm talking about creating content in the studio. If I go into my office, I know it's time to get some work done, looking at data, building reports, working with my team. But whenever you start thinking about the environment that you operate in, yes, I create content in this room. I get my hardcore work done in my office, which is the next room over. But let's take a bigger perspective and look at this and think, okay, the team that I'm around, the company that I work for, is that environment helping me move in the right direction? Is it putting me in the right mindset to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish in life? And if it's not, it may be time for you to look inwardly and have a very difficult conversation with yourself and think, what do I need to do differently? Because
Yeah.
I'm not where I want to be. This environment that I'm in is not conducive to living a happy and fulfilling life.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I get there?
100%. Yeah. I thought that at one point my environment was the reason for my unhappiness, but my environment changed completely. It took a complete 180 when I changed. And I asked myself those hard questions with the guidance of, like what we talked about, a mentor, where I doubt I would have come to that realization alone for sure, because I didn't even know that personal development existed. But my environment changed, my relationships changed with the same people once I started to work on myself, and they started to see that I was working on myself. And this leads me to one of my final questions for you, because I think this will be fascinating to hear what you say. One of the first things I did when I became a leader with the guidance again of my mentor was I went to every single person on my team, 17 people, even though many of us didn't have the greatest relationship. I asked them, what can I do in order to be the best leader possible for you? How can I best lead you? Like, we didn't do a disc test, we didn't do a personality test at that point, but I just asked them, how can I best lead you? And that question right there solidified me, as it built trust, enough trust for, it didn't build trust forever, but it built enough trust for them to go along for the ride with me, to take that piece of advice I give them at the meeting when before they might not have taken that piece of advice. And it allowed me to begin doing the work that had to be done in order to foster that environment that we're talking about.
That was able to build trust because you were being vulnerable. You were coming in, sitting down, and you genuinely wanted their feedback. You genuinely wanted to know, how can I be better for you?
Yeah.
And I think that's an area where a lot of new leaders struggle, because they think, oh, wow, I've finally made it. Now I've got a team of people that I can tell what to do. Man, again, you might achieve some sort of short-term results, but it's not sustainable. If you
Mm-hmm.
walk into that room and you genuinely care and you just ask the question, hey, what can I do for you? What do you need to see from me to
Mm-hmm.
help you be successful? Immediately, even if you don't have a great conversation with that person, you're starting to shift their perspective, even if just a slight amount. And then you take that and start building on it. And then when they tell you, hey, I really need this. Now, when
Yeah.
you execute on that, wow, you just completely flipped their perspective. Now, they may still be a little bit reserved or kind of in a trust but verify mode. But if you're able to walk in, check your ego, and have that conversation, you start the process of
Yeah.
building trust with the people on your team. And I went through something similar whenever I stepped in and started leading human resources. There were 7 HR managers that reported directly to me at that point in time. Now, 6 of them wholeheartedly believed they were going to be the next director of HR. And so I had to have a little bit of an awkward conversation with them, explaining why the IT guy was now leading human resources. But we worked through that together. And initially, whenever I stepped into the role, it was only supposed to be for about a year to help build the team, cement some solid processes in place, and then improve some of those processes. And then we were going to bring in a seasoned HR executive, or I was going to put one of the HR managers in front of senior leadership and give them the opportunity to interview for the role. And I was completely transparent with them about that. And I said, hey, I'm only here for a year. If you can help me get this team in a better place, I will help you, put you in front of senior leadership and give you this opportunity that you
Yes.
want. And because they saw that I genuinely was trying to help them out, and even if that meant replacing me in the role, man, that is so powerful.
Yeah.
There have been times in my career where some of my direct reports, whenever I have that conversation of, hey, what are you looking for in your career? Where do you want to be? And there are a few of them that say, actually, I want your job. My
Yep.
response is fantastic. Here's
Yes.
what you need to learn to be able to do it. Let's see if we can get you there together.
Yeah.
Because I have found over the years, just leading IT and then human resources and then safety and transportation, leading all of these functional domains, I think a common misconception that some new leaders or undeveloped leaders have and they struggle with is, well, if I'm in this leadership role and I teach people on my team how to do what I do, there's not going to be a need for me and then I'll lose my job. Man,
Yes.
nothing could be further from the truth.
Scarcity mindset, right?
Exactly. It's that scarcity mindset. And when you build them up and the team can operate completely autonomously and they don't need your help or guidance at all,
Yeah.
that's the best position you can possibly be in, because that frees you up to start focusing on other areas, start solving
Mhm.
bigger challenges in the business and having an even greater impact. And when you do that, more doors will open up for you. And then ultimately you can have a bigger impact across the broader organization.
In 3 minutes, you just explained probably one of the most important leadership principles that we could possibly hear. And I highly recommend everyone rewind that 3 minutes and listen to that again, especially if you are a leader who is a new leader, an existing leader, a leader who has stepped into a role that now you're leading other people who wanted that same role that you stepped into. Or if you're even that leader who wants to take it to that next step and move into that next senior role, but you're wondering how to do it, it comes from exactly what you just said. The intention of my only role is to help build other leaders to do what it is I'm doing, right? Because if you have 3 other people who are doing what you're doing, then when the time comes for you to move up, you don't have that awkward conversation. And now that time where your superior or your leader says, okay, Brandon, we're going to move you up to this next role. Who's going to take your position? Right. And you've built no one. And let me tell you, I've worked with one leader specifically. Hopefully they don't listen to this because they'll probably know who they are. One leader specifically who they are leading actually a team of like 60 people. And they have one team or a couple team leads. But if this person stepped out of their role, if this leader stepped out of their role, everything would be in shambles. Everything would fall apart because they do it very well. They lead very well, but they have this control problem of I need to control everything. I need to be the eyes and the ears, and their life is their work, and they love that, and they would never change that. And I don't know how they do it because they've got a family of 4 kids and a wife and all these things, but they somehow do it. But if they stepped away, things would fall apart. And it speaks to building up those people behind them to take those reins should they step away, because what happens if they don't? All the work that they did over the last 8 to 10 years now falls away because they failed to build other leaders behind them. It's such an important conversation to have.
It really is. I did a show a couple of months back called Don't Be the Nexus, or the Nexus of Leadership, or something like that. But one of the things that I have also seen is you have a strong leader or a strong individual contributor, and they land in that leadership role. And because they have an incredible amount of capacity and understanding of operations and their team and their business, they become this nexus where everyone on their team goes up to them for everything. And then everyone in the business comes to them for everything. Now, that is great from a job security perspective. But if that leader gets hit by a bus or leaves the organization for one reason or another, you end up with a very challenging dynamic, and you're not
Mhm.
serving the people on your team. You're not setting them up for success. And so whenever I coach leaders that actually have that issue where they are the nexus of the organization, one of the things that I like to do is talk them through connecting the dots. And let's
Mhm.
just say you're a vice president of HR and you have a director of comp and a payroll manager and a corporate HR manager. Instead of you having them come to you for everything and then you go out to the business leaders, start connecting those dots.
Yeah.
Say, hey, I'm going to get you in touch with the president of this business unit. Payroll manager, you talk to this president. Now, whenever you start doing that, they're probably going to get nervous because the thought of a payroll manager now having a conversation with business unit presidents. But that's a good thing. You're
Mhm.
forcing them to grow. You're establishing connections. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that helps them become better, helps them better understand the organization, which means they can better support the business, and you're giving them exposure and opportunities. Now,
That's
also,
true.
when you do that and you approach the senior leadership, hey, I want to promote this person from supervisor to manager, it's a no-brainer
Yeah.
because they already know who that is. They know their name, they know they're a high performer, and they know that they can trust them. So
Yes.
it makes it much, much easier for you to be able to promote the people on your team once you've given them that exposure and given them the opportunity to shine. So I guess in summary, if you're the nexus, if your team is coming up to you and then everyone in the business is coming to you, figure out a way to open up those channels of communication where everybody can talk to everybody.
Yeah.
And man, watch the performance of your team go through the roof, watch the confidence of the team go through the roof. It's very encouraging and impressive to watch a leader go from being the nexus into just opening up all of those channels of communication, opening up all of that bandwidth for you to support the business.
That's excellent advice. And that's one of the greatest staples of the greatest and most effective leader is not what position you made it to, not how much money you earned the business. It's about how many other leaders that you built up behind you through connecting those dots and giving them the opportunity to rise up into a role that they maybe never even envisioned themselves being in. Or even if they don't move into a role that already exists, but noticing the powers and the strengths of the people around you, helping them notice their power and their strengths, and even helping them form and create a role that is unique to them and allow them to step into their own domain, essentially. So, I mean, there's so many different ways we could bring this, but I do want to ask you this. And I had so many other things I want to ask you because one of the other things I respect about you is your content on LinkedIn, as an example, which, by the way, guys, go follow Sean and connect with him on LinkedIn because his content's amazing. Not because he does do this, he does educate, he does teach in his posts, but the way that I've noticed that you love to teach in your posts is you'll ask a question. You'll open it with a title of some sort to get people thinking, and then you'll ask a question. And your posts aren't you just teaching and sharing your experiences, but it's creating a conversation underneath the post. And you will learn infinitely more from the conversation below the post than if, not saying you can't teach a ton because you can, but when you start that conversation, you get all these different perspectives from different industries and different timelines and different stories and histories and all these things. So I just wanted to say I compliment you for the way that you create content and start a discussion because you're creating a forum that allows people to learn in a way that is different than how they normally learn on the platform. So I commend you for that.
I appreciate that. And it's something that I can't say that there's been intentionality behind it. There's something maybe in my subconscious. And I go to some networking events, CIO forums, CHRO forums, and things like that. And while there's a lot of content that is taught up on stage, I find infinitely more value in networking with my peers and having conversations and seeing, hey, what are you doing over here? Well, wait, what is your experience in this? Because those are real world examples. And when you start having that type of a conversation, people want to help each other out. So you use the word creating a forum just a moment ago. And I think that's what I'm trying to accomplish is to get people to start having a conversation so that they can all share their own experiences and learn from one another. And yes, I might have a nugget of information to be able to start the conversation, but sometimes you'll see sub conversations occurring down in the chat down below, and there's a lot of knowledge share that goes on in that realm. And so I can't say it's been intentional. It's just been a result of, hey, me trying to get some messaging out there and try to network with people as much as possible.
Yeah, and it works well because then you can take what you learned from that discussion and create an entirely separate post of I asked this the other day and I learned these really cool things from this conversation that was had. So then people can, rather than go back and look for the old posts, now they can see the different points that were made, and then you can even riff on those different points, which again just goes deeper and deeper, allowing people to learn a different way. So again, very awesome. Final question. And you know, The challenge for this is I'd like you to give me where you would begin in this scenario. But let's say I took you and we put Sean Barnes in charge of leading a team of 50 people you've never met before. Okay. And maybe rather than just saying, where would you begin? What are the first few steps that you would take as a new leader of a new team in order to get people moving in the direction that is best for all parties involved?
The absolute first step is building trust. Now, you get put in charge of a team of 50 people. You need to go meet with every single member of the team.
Wow.
And if you're new to that role, that might seem a bit overwhelming. And some undeveloped leaders, they'll meet with their direct reports and maybe go a second layer down. But how can you expect to have a holistic understanding of what's going on in the team if you haven't had a conversation with every single person? If you don't know their motivators, if you don't know what drives them, you can't. You'll start to formulate some ideas because you might have a few direct reports. Yeah, I'm not too thrilled with Sally. They do this, this, and this. Now, if you go have a conversation with Sally and then realize, well, there's a little bit of friction between those two individuals, you now realize that data point, that original data point, might not be the entire truth. So when you take the time to meet with every single member of the team, you better understand their challenges. You better understand what motivates them. You understand their goals and aspirations. Now that helps you formulate a more holistic understanding of the team and what's going on. Who wants to progress up to that director role? Is there anything you can do to help them grow into that role? So there's that element of building trust within your team. The second aspect of it is understanding the business. That means you've got to go have a conversation with every single one of the business leaders and earn their trust. There's an underlying theme of building trust here, but you have to build the trust of the people on your team. You build the trust of the people in the business, and you do that by a slightly different approach. When you go have a conversation with a business leader, yes, you want to build that relationship, but you want to solve their problems. You want to better understand what are your challenges. And I don't mean, is your printer broken if you're leading an IT team? Talk me through what issues you are encountering in your business. What keeps you up at night? If you can get them to open up and start sharing some of their business challenges, you may or may not be able to help them solve those problems. But if you can solve one of those problems by leveraging some sort of application or system or process, man, you just won them over.
Wow.
And then you end up having this flywheel effect of, hey, I'm going to get this small win, this small win, this small win. And you just start going and going and going. And then you become this unstoppable machine. Your team becomes this unstoppable machine because you've built trust with every one of them.
Yeah.
Now, as you embark on this journey, it's also important for you to build trust within people on your team. You're not always going to get them all to agree with one another, and they're not always going to play nice. But if they can trust and respect one another, they can have productive conflict to work through solving the problems together. So it all comes down to trust and relationships.
Wow. Fantastic advice. And I'm telling you, if we had more time, and we can even bring you back on the show in the future, if you're up for that, to talk about even specifically, because just to allude to what that future conversation will hold, like I want to ask you about, because that appeases the necessary politics in the corporate world. And this is the one thing when I work with new leaders specifically, is they don't yet understand how politics work in things. And no matter what culture you're a part of, there is the politics. There is the working alongside the egos of other people. Because while you and I understand the necessity of putting the ego aside and focusing on others, that is not always the case, right? And you have to work with that. You can't change those other people, especially if they are your business leaders, like what you're talking about. So I love how you said first meet with your team, and then meet with your business leaders, because there's a balance there. So I wish we had time to ask you, okay, so how do you balance talking with the business leaders and then talking with your team and doing both of those things congruently through the passage of time? But guys, if you loved the description that Sean just gave you of how you begin leading, of if you're an existing leader, how you can take it to that next step, then this is why you need to listen to Way of the Wolf, which is Sean's show. It's over 100 episodes now. There's links in the description, and you can watch the video of it too on Sean's YouTube channel. But brother, I just wanted to thank you again for being on the show. And my final question for you is, what would you say is your mission at this chapter in your life right now?
I want to impact the generational legacy of everybody that I work with.
Wow. You summed that up very, very well. It's almost like you've thought about that and said it to yourself before.
A little bit.
That's a powerful mission. Do you believe that you can do that?
100%. It's going to take work and effort, but it is my mission and purpose in life.
Hell yeah. Thank you for inspiring me. Thank you for helping me up my game personally. I do not say that at the end of every episode. And I'm just grateful to know you. And I'm grateful that Rob introduced us. So shout out again to Rob Party. Go check out that episode, guys. I'll link it somewhere. But Rob, you've helped me to meet incredible people, brother. So thank you for introducing me to Sean. And Sean, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor. And I'm going to have you come on my show here soon.
Let's do it. You heard it here first, guys. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Sean.
Looking forward to it.
Guys, if you took anything from that conversation with Sean, which I know you did, because I took away, literally not even exaggerating, probably 5 or 6 nuggets that I'm going to use. I should probably look at those 5 or 6 and choose the one that I want to use, because that was some of the most brilliant leadership advice I've gotten. And I've gone through leadership courses. I've read John Maxwell books, and Sean just explains things in a way that is, he takes these grandiose leadership concepts and explains them in ways that I wish I had when I began my journey as a leader. And I had some great mentors, but I heard things from him that were said in a different way that would have helped me to internalize things in different ways that would have helped me a lot. So I hope that it's the same for you. And if it is, go check out Way of the Wolf. Go connect with Sean on LinkedIn. Links are in the description. And if you did take away even just one thing from this conversation, all that I ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use this as well. This show specifically, if you enjoyed it, share it with one other person. Thanks so much for watching and listening. And thank you, most importantly, for being the best part of the Be Better team. Until next time, continue to be better.